Hey everybody, Chef Bates here. It is time to talk about food safety management systems. Active managerial control, to be specific. Now, I know this sounds boring. It's not. In chapters 4 through 7, you learned how to handle food safely throughout everything we do in the restaurant. Now, you're going to learn how to put all that stuff together and ensure the food you are serving is safe. In other words, this chapter really focuses in on the nuts and bolts of how to create and implement a food safety management system. A food safety management system is a group of practices and procedures that are intended to prevent foodborne illness. It does this by actively controlling risks and hazards throughout the flow of food. The key word here is actively. We got to be proactive to limit risks, not reactive. We must think ahead and consider what emergencies might happen and then take steps to reduce those risks. Earlier, we talked about food safety programs. And when you take all 8 of the food safety programs and you put them together, then you have a food safety management system. So let's review real quick. Those principles include things like personal hygiene, how we train and monitor our employees to maintain good personal hygiene through hand washing, clean uniforms, and avoiding cross-contamination. Supplier selection and specification, how we choose which vendors we will purchase our supplies from, ordering and receiving standards, that kind of thing. Food safety, of course, how we keep food safe through thawing, prepping, cooking, chilling, reheating, serving, all the stages of the flow of food. Quality control and assurance programs, how we make absolute sure that the food we serve is safe and cooked correctly. Those are the first 4. The next 4 of the food safety programs that make up a management system are cleaning and sanitation. That's how we make sure our equipment, our facility, and our workspace is spotless and the chance of cross-contamination is limited. Standard operating procedures, SOPs, how we organize the things our employees do every day and the ways they go about doing them to ensure a quality, safe product. Facility design and equipment programs, that's how we install and keep our equipment in proper working order to limit the chance of cross-contamination or of not cooking something properly. And last, the pest control program, how we safely keep pests out of our facility and destroy any that sneaked in. While all 8 of those programs are important, active managerial control means focusing on the 5 common risk factors for foodborne illness that are addressed throughout all of them. You know these. We went over them in Chapter 1. Purchasing food from unsafe sources. Number 1. Number 2. Failing to cook food correctly. Number 3. Holding food at incorrect temperatures. Number 4. Using contaminated equipment. And 5. Practicing poor personal hygiene. It is the manager's responsibility to actively control these and other risk factors for foodborne illness. Taken together, all these things are called active managerial control. Again, it's important to note that active managerial control is proactive rather than reactive. You must anticipate risks and plan for them. There are many ways to achieve active managerial control in a restaurant. According to the Food and Drug Administration, the FDA, you can use simple tools like training programs, manager supervision, and the incorporation of SOPs, standard operating procedures. Active managerial control can also be achieved through more complex solutions like the Hazard Analysis Critical Control Point Program, commonly known as HACCP. HACCP, HACCP. Keep that in mind. We're going to come back to it. The first step in active managerial control is finding risks, identifying risks. We need to find and document the potential foodborne illness risks that are in your restaurant. Then identify the hazards that can be controlled or eliminated. For example, if you offer a self-serve soup station, you must consider all the ways your soup might become unsafe. In the picture, a line cook is monitoring the temperature of soup that is being reheated for service, while another records the time the temperature was taken to ensure it's rewarmed from 41 degrees Fahrenheit to 165 degrees Fahrenheit within the safe amount of time. Remember, safe amount of time for reheating food? 2 hours. You knew that. Food will be safe if managers monitor critical activities in the operation. So make note of when employees must monitor food safety requirements. This might include identifying when temperatures should be taken or how often sanitar concentrations should be tested in a 3-compartment sink. For example, the executive chef in the picture is monitoring a food handler as he carries out the critical task of cooling food correctly. Corrective action. Okay. When something goes wrong, you got to fix it. take the appropriate steps to correct improper procedures or behaviors. In the picture, an executive chef has tested the sanitizer concentration and found it to be too low. He can take corrective action by checking the machine which mixes sanitizer and water to make sure it's functioning properly. He can call the company which provides the sanitizer concentrate. He can arrange for a repair. This also means the restaurant must use its backup sanitation products while it waits for the technician to arrive. Taken all together, all these different actions are corrective. They're corrective. He's fixing what went wrong. There's an old saying in the restaurant world, trust but verify. We train our employees to understand and follow the rules for food safety, but we must also monitor them to make sure they are following through on the SOPs and the standards we've taught. Employees who follow through on corrective action on their own, those guys are well trained. They are valuable additions to the restaurant team. In the picture, a health inspector has requested proof that the employees on duty the day of his visit have been formally trained to safely prepare food for sale to the restaurant guest. Any health inspector has the right to request this kind of documentation at any time. We have to ensure employees are trained and retrained as needed and keep track of it. Training must happen on the first day an employee starts work at a restaurant, even if they've been hired from another restaurant which holds a similar training program. Employees must be retrained regularly, once or twice a year at least, and must also be retrained or terminated if they are caught working with food in a manner which might cause a foodborne illness outbreak. From time to time, it will be necessary to assess all your food safety systems to make sure they are working correctly and effectively. This is especially true if a foodborne illness outbreak occurs. In the picture, a chef de cuisine is meeting with executive chefs from a large resort, all the different chefs from several different outlets, to go over their yearly reevaluation of their food safety systems and offer suggestions on how they can make them more effective and efficient. Periodically assess the system to make sure it's working. The FDA provides specific recommendations for controlling the common risk factors for foodborne illness. These are known as public health interventions. They're designed to protect public health. Don't confuse public health interventions with the other things that we've covered in this chapter. The 6 active managerial controls, the 8 food safety systems, all of that stuff is based on ServSafe principles. They're not enforced. Nobody's enforcing ServSafe rules. The public health interventions are recommendations made by the FDA to food service companies, and they are enforced by local regulatory authorities. Remember this, please. ServSafe concepts are rules that are recommended to restaurants to prevent a foodborne illness outbreak from happening. Public health interventions, on the other hand, those are laws which must be followed or the restaurant may be fined or even shut down. There are 5 of these public health interventions. First up, demonstration of knowledge. As a manager, you must be able to show that you know what to do to keep food safe. Becoming certified in food safety is one way to show this. All across the country, local regulatory authorities require at least one person be on the premise who is certified in a food safety program like ServSafe at all times. Whenever they're open, somebody has to have a ServSafe certification at every restaurant in America. Number 2, staff health controls. You got to have procedures in place to make sure staff are practicing good personal hygiene. For example, staff must know they are required to report illness and illness symptoms to management. This requirement can be met by holding and documenting staff training, always a good idea, as well as posting informational posters which remind staff to tell their manager if they're sick. Number 3, control hands as a vehicle of contamination. In other words, don't touch food somebody's going to eat, douche. That's terrible and disgusting. You got to have controls in place to prevent bare hand contact with ready-to-eat food. This might include requiring the use of tongs or gloves whenever you're handling ready-to-eat food, but basically, just make sure nobody's touching somebody else's salad, because that's nasty. You got to have very clear time and temperature parameters for controlling pathogens. A parameter is simply a limit. Procedures must be put in place to limit the time food spends in the temperature danger zone. Requiring food handlers to check the temperature of food that's being hot held every 2 hours is a good example. While it's not required, many local regulatory authorities suggest keeping time temperature logs that document the length of time food spends in the temperature danger zone and the critical control points that have been met. Critical control points, we'll get to those when we talk about HACCP a little bit later on. We're not there yet. Last but not least, consumer advisories. We've already talked about these when we're talking about how you need to let people know they're eating raw food. Notices and reminders must be provided to customers if you serve raw or undercooked menu items. These notices must include a statement about the risks of eating these foods, as well as identify which menu items contain raw or partially cooked foods that are potentially dangerous. Good owners, executive chefs, and restaurants reduce potential foodborne illness risk factors by understanding and implementing those 8 food safety programs, focusing on the 5 most common risk factors for foodborne illness, and practicing the 6 steps to achieve active managerial control. Legally, they are responsible to local regulatory authorities like the health inspector for understanding the FDA public health interventions and following them closely. And that's it. Chapter 8, Part 1, done. In the books and finished. Thanks. You guys stuck it through, and I appreciate it. I'll see you in the kitchen.